Welcome. We're up to Genesis 22, where God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. And this is such a challenging, difficult story. But in context, I think we can find a good place for it. Now, if you were doing a podcast or making a video or doing an assignment or a report, you would have to have a title for your effort. And I'm asking you to think at the end, what's your title for this account? Give your story this title. In the graphic there we see a little etching from Rembrandt. He did lots and lots of these where he looked at the sacrifice of Isaac. It obviously resonated for him. So we look at it and first of all listen to it as sacred story. And it's a powerfully told story. Picture yourself sitting around a cooking fire and the official storyteller is told, tell us a story again about Isaac and Abraham when he was asked to sacrifice Isaac. 3 times Abraham says, here I am. He says it to God in verse 1. He says it to Isaac when Isaac's querying, okay, we've got wood, we've got fire, but where's the sacrifice? And then at the very moment, the critical moment, with his hand upraised, and God calls out to him, Abraham says, here I am. And the story starts with Abraham being told, go to a place I shall tell you about. And that's so like Genesis 12, where from Haran, God simply tells Abraham and Sarah, go to a land I shall show you. But now we're at the end of the account, and there's a lot of shared history. And this time, Abraham doesn't have a big, complicated commentary. There's no commentary at all, simply silent acceptance. It's not like he's churning away inside and has to tell God about it like he did about how will the child be born, because nothing's happening with me and Sarah. And when Isaac queries him, he simply says, God will provide. So here we see the child of the promise to be handed back to God. And the amazing thing is seems to be this deep faith and no questioning. Luther, with his own experiences of losing a 12-year-old daughter, simply said, because Luther's always looking for faith in action, he says Abraham trusted God that even if he'd had to go the whole way, God would have raised Isaac back to life for him. He trusted God to keep that promise so much. Now, from us on the outside, we're told at the very beginning, this is a test. So we can get all stirred up about, and as people who are looking for a reason to not believe in the Christian God, they love choosing this text. But we're told this is a test. And if you look at the end, God swears an oath on himself. Both Abraham and God are changed by this whole experience. And the powerful thing is, God does provide. Abraham got it right. God provided for Abraham and Isaac, and God continues to provide for us. And the final big, huge way he does that is through his own son going to the cross. The child of promise finally is Jesus. And God provides him for us to bring us forgiveness and hope, to lift off from us evil and trauma and disaster, to give us new life and new hope. So we said this is coming at the end of a whole lot of chapters of shared history between Abraham, Sarah, and God. And we see Abraham has matured beautifully. And so do we. Let's talk about sacrificing. And here's my provocative comment initially. Were you a child sacrifice? My siblings and I would look at each other and say, yeah, we were when we were little. My dad was a college chaplain, Lutheran pastor, and he honoured what he did with his whole being. So he had a full-time teaching load. He was doing morning chapels for the whole school. Then the afternoon after school, he was coaching a sporting team. Term 1, it was cricket. Term 2, it was rugby. Term 3, it was tennis. And there were only 3 terms in those years. So if we wanted to be with Dad, we hung out and watched him doing his coaching. I knew all about rugby from when I was a 5-year-old. And there were things we had to work through with our dad about that. And it's good now, but yep, we were child sacrifices. He was desperately trying to do the right thing and fulfill his call, and there was a cost to that. Have you made sacrifices? Of course you have. You can't get through life without making sacrifices. And have you sacrificed others? Whoa, that's a tricky question. And if you have sacrificed others, was it handing over to the God of life and salvation, or was it some sort of idol, some sort of false God who demanded, you have to do this, you have to keep to this to fulfill these ideals or to get this job or whatever? It's so easy to sacrifice to idols and think we're doing the right thing. I'm going to jump sideways now. Here's a dream from a teenage girl. It involves a family sacrifice, but it might help us with a text as well. So here's her dream. I find myself in a round stone room in a castle. There's a square stone altar in the middle of the room, and a voice says to me, I must sacrifice my father, and I must enact it on this stone altar. Well, you'd think, well, that's a bad dream, but it isn't. Now, in real life, she had a happy, healthy relationship with her dad, so this isn't something bad happening. So what's happening at the soul level? And if we think of sacrifice as giving something or someone over to God, what's she being invited to do in this dream? Well, Paul, writing to the Corinthians, says, when I was a child, I thought like a child and acted like a child, but now that I've grown up in the faith, here's what I do. And this young person is moving from being a child to a teen to an adult. And her older way of relating to her dad, dad's perfect or dad's this or dad's that or whatever, that's all good. But that has to be let go for a new, more mature relationship and connection. And I think we can resonate with that. We all have to give our children or our grandchildren over to God. We can't control them or make them do what we want all the time, and certainly not once they're adults. And here's a big one. What about some of those things we put so much work and effort and energy into? Maybe it's at church or in congregation. Maybe it's developing a business or a farm or a career. Some of us have been very involved in schools and school leadership. That's a big thing. What happens when you've worked hard, built a school up, and then you have to hand it over to someone else? What about our professional things we worked so hard? There are times when those are very difficult things to do. Will the next person take it on and work with it in a good way? There's no guarantees. Finally, we can't claim the ownership of our lives. We have to let all that stuff go to God. That's like a sacrifice. We have to trust that there will be new life and good outcomes for when we got it right, and also, and maybe more especially, when we got things wrong. So, here's my question. What's your title for this story? As you think about it and reflect on it and reflect on the idea of sacrifices and how finally they're a pretty basic part of everyday life. What's your title for this story? One that I heard given back to me from the sermon time was, will you trust me? Not can you trust me? Will you trust me? And that's assuming we have a God who loves us passionately and deeply, wants the best for us, and wants to be with us in a lovely, tight, beautiful connection. Will you trust me? Peace be with you. Amen.